Once again, hello, and thank you very much for joining us today. Especially right before you guys actually arrived, I kept on thinking to myself, this is really lekker braai weather. And yet you guys are here, so I thank you. This takes commitment. If you think sleeping late for a teenager is a difficult endeavor, trying to keep a man from good weather in a braai is even bigger. So this takes true commitment. But I was reminded again this week as I was preparing, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, that Sophia and I went to one of those guilt braais. I don't know if you know a guilt braai. So when you go to an old family member or friend that you haven't seen for a long time, you usually braai there about once a year. Not because you don't like them. You like them, it's fine, but they're not part of your immediate circle. They live just far enough so that you don't want to be there every weekend, but not far enough so that you can sort of say you can't make it. So it's just close enough so that you have to be there at least once every few years for one of those braais. And Sophia and I actually went to one of those, and we were a bit early, and as we got there, everybody's still bringing in cooler boxes, and it's lekker weather like this, and I'm starting to speak to the host that I don't really know that well, because Sophia and I just I think we just got married or something. It was around that time. It was either right before or right after we got married. And I think it was just after. So I was starting to meet new part of the family members, the more extended parts, and we get there and everyone's very friendly, but I was expecting everyone to sort of still be in that mode of preparing stuff and getting stuff ready. But for some reason I was chatting to the host and she was calm, she was relaxed, and we were just having a discussion, and part of this discussion was just what are we up to these days, and what are our interests, getting to know one another. And I mentioned that I was in the process of writing that first booklet that we have there, Finding the Only Hope, that sort of just summarizes our Christian beliefs in a simple way, because I just feel that there's so many complicated things. And as I was touching on this, sort of out of the blue, but technically in hindsight, it sort of makes sense that she asked this question, but I was taken aback, and she asked me, so what makes me think that Christianity is the only true religion? And for me, it was just one of those questions that sort of put me on my back foot. Because although I had a passion for it, although I believe it, trying to get that message across, and you don't know how much time you have. You don't have we have a 5-week course, let me tell you what I believe. But at the end of the day, I couldn't even fill a 5-minute conversation. So I was sort of taken aback, and I try to share what I felt, and I try to share that I believe it's true and what I believe, but I didn't have enough time, and it was a bit awkward. But there was something about that interaction that just sort of reminded me that at the most random times, from the most random people, you could have this type of question. Maybe not directly, but indirectly. And today I sort of want to pose that same question to you. Like, we all believe our Bibles, or at least most of us say that we do. But now the question is, why? Why do I believe this? And generally the answer is faith. Like het geloof. I believe it because I believe it. And that's beautiful. And to an extent, it's biblical. But the thing is, so do the Muslims. They believe the Quran is right. And the Hindus and the Buddhists. So what separates us from the rest? If you can put it that way. Now, these days, you can't even define truth, because that's a completely different topic these days. Never mind differentiating this one from that one. And the thing is, for me, when we talk about faith, it's beautiful and it takes us to a certain extent. But I don't believe that that's the complete answer that we as Christians should have. And some people might object to this, but if I look at what the Bible teaches, the Bible actually teaches quite a few things about faith specifically. And one of the things that Jesus' half-brother James actually writes about in James chapter 2, I think it's around 14 to 17, he mentions how faith alone cannot save us. And that's not something that we hear every day, because we hear, through faith we are saved, and that's true. But James sort of adds, true faith will be shown in your actions. Because you can believe, even the demons believe. That's his whole argument. That's wonderful. Even the demons believe in God. But yet, what are your actions showing? Are we putting our faith in God and allowing Him to be our final authority? And sort of, where does our faith go? Because many people say they believe in a God, but their life is completely the same. And it sort of reminds me of Jesus saying, one of the most terrifying verses in the Bible, or sections in the Bible, where Jesus explains that many will come to me in the last day, saying, Jesus, Jesus, and then He just says, go away from me, I never knew you. And that for me is a scary thing, because how does it work? Because I thought that, once you're saved, you're always saved, and to an extent, I do believe that the Bible teaches that. But yet also Jesus gave that parable of the sower where he explicitly says that some seeds will be sown on rocky ground because they won't have deep roots. You know, they'll start, they'll like the message, but they won't persevere. Then he also speaks about the seeds sown between the thorns, because they'll start, but then the cares of the world and the riches of the world will distract them. And then they'll lose track. And that's a scary thought, but that's Jesus' teaching. That's God Almighty telling us that some people will get distracted by the world and just sort of wither away. But then there will also be seeds sown in good ground and they will flourish. Now, what does this have to do with science in the Bible? Well, when I first became a Christian, there was something that I noticed that I knew this was true, but I couldn't say why. I knew this was true, and I sort of felt scared asking certain types of questions because I'm scared that my Christian bubble would be popped. I don't know if any of you have sort of had that in the back of your mind, where you want to know, but you're also scared to know because maybe it might mean that you have to become a Muslim or Buddhist or just God doesn't exist and then everything's pointless. But early in my Christian life, I'm very, very thankful. I stumbled across through a friend and a friend and a friend. I stumbled across material that a large part of it I'm going to be discussing today that enhanced my faith and grew my faith. And my belief for today, my hope for today is to do two things. Number one, to take our faith and root it deeper into this world so that we can get more nutrients, so that we can have a stronger foundation of our belief, so that we don't at the end or during our life get turned away from this doctrine or that doctrine and we're just stuck on truth whether we like it or not, whether our lives are good or not, that we're stuck in this because we know it's true, not because we like it, not because we just hope, but because we know without a shadow of a doubt that it's true. And then secondly, the hope is so that we might have answers for the people out there. Because if there's one thing that I've noticed is that every single Sunday, every time we gather together as a church or as a group of Christians, we're technically preaching to the choir. But more than that, our hope is to equip us so that we can go out and actually teach the message. So that when you're at that bar and someone asks you that random question or says something that just completely is wrong, you have a legitimate, loving answer. Because whether we like it or not, the Bible explicitly says in 1 Peter 3:15 that we should always be ready to give a reason for the hope that's in us, with meekness and fear. And that's the thing. We should always be ready, which is why we actually started way back when we started the My Inner Hope non-profit organization, we're not selling anything, I'm just saying this is sort of where everything that we stand for come from, and Village Church actually originated from this. And a long time ago I wrote this, and I believe that this is what we as a church should actually be. My Inner Hope, or just Christianity, is not about any one individual, it's about all of us. It's also not about giving hope, because we can't give hope. It's about highlighting the hope that God gives us. And it's a hope that is all around us, and a hope that can only be seen when it is shared. I can't tell you this is what it is or this is what it is. It can only be seen when it is experienced. But yet today, we hope to take this a bit further so that we can actually deepen our faith. But today, above everything else, I believe that we're looking to search for truth. This is my main objective above everything else, because I've seen people sort of cringe when I say I'm not looking to prove Christianity. I'm not trying to say that Jesus is everything. First and foremost, I want truth. If that means if the Muslims are right, then that's what I want. I don't want to choose this because I like it. I want truth above all else. But these days we're living in a time where truth is relative to everyone's situation. We're living in a world where people believe there is no truth, it's only perception. This is what people believe. And you know it's true because you can put it on a slideshow with a nice picture at the background. That's how you know it's got authority. But this is what people believe. People say stuff like this. People say, okay, no, but there is no truth. But the response to that is what you're saying true? I believe in something called the law of non-contradiction. I believe that there's something called truth. I was speaking to someone in a coffee shop recently, and the guy had the most interesting questions, and I felt that God was leading me to give good answers. And we got to a point where he just sort of realized that he doesn't really have an answer for anything anymore. His questions are being answered, and because of that, the foundation of his worldview is sort of shattering underneath him. To which point he said, but every rule has an exception, because I was basing everything on there is a God and how the triune God just works together. And at one point he just said, but listen, every rule has an exception. And my response was, might this be one of them? Because every single time people like to say things like, no, but don't impose your morality on me. You can't tell me what is right or wrong. But yet when they say that to you, they're imposing their sense of morality on you. People like to say things and it sounds wonderful, but yet we need to have answers and not be on the back foot the whole time. This is what we're doing today. So today we're going to be looking at a couple of worldviews, because unfortunately many people believe this, that there's a difference between faith versus fact and science versus religion, and there's just this galactic battle of truth and religion. Science and religion can't ever merge. And I believe this to be completely false, as we'll see today, because I believe in the search for truth. But one of the biggest worldviews that I believe is currently happening, apart from the fact that we can all sort of choose what we want and then there's no truth, that's not the topic for discussion today. We'll do that when I really want to do an apologetics workshop, or how to reason or to discuss our faith in the future. That's something that I really want to do. But for now, I want to look at what people say, that science has disproven God. And that's just not the case. The thing is, people believe that there's science versus evolution, but why do they say that? Well, for example, if you look at what Stephen Hawking said, he said that there's no God, according to Stephen Hawking, in one of his new books. Well, his last book, 2018. And his reasoning behind this is that there's no God was because there is gravity. Because there's gravity, there is no God. That was sort of the foundation of his argument. But the problem with that is, what sustains gravity? Why is gravity always a constant? Why doesn't it go up and down? Why is it there in the first place? We sort of know what it is when there's something big. There's attraction and it pulls down, and that's sort of what it is. But why is it there in the first place? Why is it just not there? We need a God. So his whole argument, and there's many people who go into a lot of depth in just disproving that whole theory, how it doesn't make sense. But today I want to sort of start on the topic of evolution. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I'm going to sort of dumbify and simplify a lot of the things, but everything that I'm discussing, we're more than welcome afterwards to sit down and I can show you the sources and we can look at the more lengthy ways that things are discussed. But I believe that everything, whether it be complex, big, it can be explained in a simple and small way. And this is sort of what we're doing today. So if we look at what people believe according to evolution. Now, once again, I'm not trying to prove my point, although I am, but I want truth above all else. So if we look at, for example, what evolution teaches, because we hear about it, but we don't fully understand what textbooks say. So what textbooks say, university textbooks and science journals and Stephen Hawking and all these people say, they say that nothing exploded, literally nothing. Nothing existed before the Big Bang. So this is not me. This is the world's most renowned physicist and scientist. Nothing exploded. Nothing exploded, and it created everything. And from that everything, the stars and the sun and the earth and everything sort of cooled down over billions of years. And on earth, the conditions were perfect. For no reason, but everything was perfect. And it rained on the rocks. We don't know how, but it rained on the rocks for billions of years. And it formed like a primordial soup. And in this primordial soup, the first single-celled organisms arose. And from these single-celled organisms, the first sort of small little cell started, and that eventually became a fish, which eventually became a frog, which eventually became a cheetah and a hyena and a human and a snake, and we all come from the same single cell. And it sounds stupid when I say it this way, but this is what people believe. Even if you look at National Geographic, which is a recognized publication, all species evolved from single cell, study finds. Please focus on the study finds. So the heading confirms this. Then the subheading, creationism, called an absolute horrible hypothesis. So obviously they must have some wonderful, wonderful scientific proof to say that God does not exist and creationism is stupid. Then you start reading the article. All life on Earth evolved from a single-celled organism that lived roughly 3.5 billion years ago. A new study seems to confirm. Suddenly the story starts shifting. The study supports the widely held universal common ancestor theory firstly proposed by Charles Darwin more than 150 years ago. So now you see that scientific publications and in university textbooks, they are punting this belief that evolution is true and God doesn't exist. By the way, fun fact, who knows what is the only degree that scientist Charles Darwin has? Theology. True story. He studied theology, he couldn't get work, he went on a ship because he didn't have work, so he went on a ship to try and help people who were doing some investigations. He took a bunch of books with him, and when he got to this place, I can't remember where, he found that there were many different types of finches. And because there were many different types of finches, he thought that they all stemmed down from the same ancestor, which is fine. But now you're starting to say that the finch, the frog, and the hippopotamus have the same granddad. And that doesn't really happen. But we'll get there when we get there. For now, I just want to focus on this is what evolution teaches. And the reason they believe this is because of dating methods, or one of the reasons why they try and propose this. So the two dating methods that they try and use or support is the one called carbon dating. Now, carbon dating in its most simple form, they believe that the earth and the sun and everything sends out radiation in the form of carbon-14. This breaks down and it is absorbed by all natural and all living organisms, trees and plants and animals and us, to the point where we sort of reach an equilibrium. Does that sort of make sense? So we all have, let's say for example, 10 carbon-14. Then when we die, this carbon-14 sort of diminishes and reduces, and then according to that you can sort of see from the equilibrium over a certain period of time, if you now have 2 left, that means you are 100 years old or 2,000 years old. So theoretically it sort of makes sense. The problem is, despite the fact that it makes sense, the figures don't always add up. And this is from science journals. The first one is from Science, the Science Journal in 1984, the second one from the Antarctic Journal, and the third one is from Natural History in 1949. So the first one, shells from a living snail were carbon dated as being 27,000 years old. A freshly killed seal was carbon dated as having died 1,300 years ago. I'm not making this up, this is in scientific journals. The lower leg of the Fairbanks Creek mammoth had a radiocarbon age of 15,380 years, while the skin and the flesh were dated at 21,300 years old. Now maybe it's just me, maybe I'm too religious, but I believe that when we do science, it should be testable, repeatable, and provable. If I do it scientifically, then I should always be getting the same results. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I believe that this is how science should be done. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and this is why they don't always carbon date stuff. The way that they actually date it is something called the geologic column. Now, this is the geologic column. Some of you have seen the movie Jurassic Park. So what they believe is, as the Earth sort of aged over millions of years, this type of soil arrived, and then the next phase it had this type of soil, and then this type of soil, and then this type of soil, and then you sort of get what I'm saying. So every age has a different type of soil as we get soil from outer space and all these types of things. And it sounds wonderful, it sounds great, but the thing is, Charles Lyell, who made this, who sort of proposed this order of events, because then you know, like these things are 544 million years old, the smaller things, and as we get older you see there's us, we're riding horses, and it's all beautiful. By the way, this was not designed by Pieter van der Westhuizen, this was just the guy who helped illustrate it so that we can use it without copyright. But what we did, Charles Lyell, who was a lawyer by the way, not a paleontologist, a lawyer, so proposed this. Now the interesting thing is, and I sort of want to put let's call it a reward if you will. If anyone can show me evidence of 5 of these layers in the same order anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Because nowhere in the world do they find all of these in the same place. And if you sort of dig down into it, you get, for example, you get limestone here, you get limestone here, and you get limestone there. But now you're saying, but how does this work? Well, I find it quite interesting because how they use this geologic column is very interesting. And you're more than welcome to go research this, but it's true. So they date the fossils according to the type of strata that they find it in, the type of stone. That's how they date the fossils. Okay, you're still with me. But how do they date the strata, the rocks? According to the fossils that they find in it. True story. from the American Journal of Science. The rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. True story. And this is not me trying to poke fun, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. This is a preconceived idea to try and punt a belief system. Now, I believe that science does work in this way. So you have a hypothesis or a theory, and then you do an experiment, and then you test it, and either it supports it or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then you sort of throw away your theory and find a new one. But the problem is we don't have a new one to replace this one with, so we're sort of sticking to it. And this is what's happening here. Another example of evolution that people believe is this one by Ernest Haeckel in the 1800s. So this is a doctor who proposed that all stages of life in the fetus of a human, a salamander, a frog, a gecko and a rabbit and a man, they all develop in the same sort of sense, and right close to the end of your birth you change into whatever you need to be. Now people believe this, and this is a personal story. I was teaching a student in 2016, I think. So she was she was a surgeon. I can't remember which surgeon, but she was a surgeon in South Korea. This is not a second or third world or horrible country. South Korea. She is intelligent, she is smart, and she was great. And when I was speaking to her about evolution, she mentioned this, that she found recently in her textbooks. This is one of her reasons why she believes in evolution. She is a surgeon. So according to the London Times in 1997, this is one of the worst cases of scientific fraud. It is shocking to find that somebody one thought was a great scientist was deliberately misleading. It makes me angry what Haeckel did, Ernest Haeckel, the guy who proposed this, that was to take the human embryo and copy it, pretending that the salamander, the pig, and the others look the same at the same stages of development. They don't. These are fakes. So this is in world publications. The London Times. But the problem is, this is still in university textbooks. It's proven to be fake. And when Ernest Haeckel was approached with this and he was confronted by the fact that this is fake, he blamed the draftsman. True story. But he was the draftsman. His response to the publications and to the media was, he blamed the draftsman, ignoring the fact that he was the draftsman. We see things like this where scientists are trying to show the missing link. This is one of the missing links called Nebraska Man. Now this entire scene that is still kept in textbooks and in universities and in museums, you see scenes like this where you find this missing link where apes are turning into humans. That's just why they still call it the missing link. So this link between ape and man, because we struggle to find this, which is why they still call it the missing link. But in any case, they call this one of those missing links. But what makes me unhappy, and for some reason some people say it's being religious or not, but what makes me unhappy is this entire scene, his body shape, the way that he interacted with nature, the whole strata, everything that's going on in the scene was to depict how this individual lived. And we are told that we have fossil evidence. Now for yourself, just for a moment, think about what type of evidence you need to find so that we can accurately know all of this. You would need some substantial like ligaments, and you see that, moving, and maybe some tools next to him. This makes sense. Nebraska Man, ape man of the Western world. Scientists construct a new million-year-old link from tooth found near Brian's former home. The first evidence of anthropoid in the United States. And then this was debunked a few years later when they discovered the tooth was actually a pig's tooth. I'm not kidding. So this is debunked, but it's still kept in textbooks. Now the reason they try and find these missing links is because chimps, monkeys and things are 96% the same as humans. We've all heard this, and it sounds like a wonderful way or an explanation of how things can be true. This is what they say. This is what the scientists say, so we must believe them. But I have a theory. Peter, I saw yesterday at your house, you have some watermelon. I believe, and I've got a theory, if you don't pick those watermelons, if you don't eat them, they will become clouds. My reasoning is, I'm going to use the same reasoning as scientists. My reasoning is, a watermelon is 92% water A cloud is 100% water, which means there's only an 8% difference. Am I using a valid argument or not? I sound like an idiot. But yet, for some reason, when we read it in National Geographic, it's acceptable. It's not a problem. Scientists have sequenced the genome of the chimpanzee and found that humans are 96% similar to the great ape species. I even found evidence on the internet, because you need to know that the internet is a very interesting thing. What I'm trying to say with all of this, there's something that happens because we see it on the media, because we see scientists. You can see evidence, but the interpretation thereof is almost more important than the data or the experiments or the proof itself. Because how you interpret this data determines truth. And also what worldview you're trying to push also determines the rest. But it's one thing for me to stand here the whole time and say, but evolution is wrong because the evidence that they're seeking here is wrong, and this evidence has been debunked, and this has been debunked, and this has been debunked. What do we believe? Now I'm going to tell you briefly what I believe, and there's many different views. I know this, and not all scientists believe what I just showed. I know this, but I'm going to share briefly what I believe, and then I'm going to look back at science, testable, provable science as I requested before, and I believe that this points us in the right direction. Because very much in the same way that we don't see the wind, but we see the effects of the wind, and we don't see gravity, but we see the effects of gravity, I believe that we can see the effects and then point back to God. So what I believe, if we look at the Bible in its most simple form, I believe that about 4,500 years ago, 4,400 years ago, God created everything. About 2,500 years ago, there was a great big flood. This is where we currently are, about 2,000 years after Jesus. This is where we are now. So I believe that roughly the world is between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, depending who you are. Some people have this worldview, and some people believe that the Bible teaches this. And some people have this idea that we need to constantly search the Bible for the hidden meanings, the hidden secret realm, or the hidden things. And I believe that God is more than capable of finding and inserting all of these things in the Bible. But first and foremost, I believe that the Bible was written for the everyday dummy, me and you, and its most straightforward form. So I believe when God said He created the world in 7 days, if we look at the rest of Genesis, there's no reason for us to believe that He did it over 1,000 years or over 1,000,000 years. I believe that God, as Einstein said, does not play with dice in creation. He doesn't hope for the best. I believe that when God did something, He did it purposely, and He did it in 7 days as an example for all of us. But let's just look at this timeline. Just bear this timeline for argument's sake for now. Let's call the world roughly about 6,000 years old, just for simplicity's sake. Because I believe that we need to look at science that we can touch and feel. And as I mentioned before, apparently I'm very much in the mood for a braai. Now I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I remember when Sophia and I first started dating. We were sitting on the porch, my dad was still in the house, he was watching TV, and I lit the fire, and Sophia and I are chatting, and things are lekker, we're talking, and when I looked to my left, I missed the fire. It was a light, and because we were talking so much, I sort of missed my braai gap, if you will. So we had to go in, my dad had to cook the wors and the vleis inside in the oven. I did not gain manly points at that stage. But for anyone who's ever done this, or anyone who's ever lit a fire in a fireplace or in a braai, you can sort of know for a fact when you light something, it eventually burns out. This is a natural, testable law that we know. You know what science says? Science says that the sun is getting smaller because it's burning up. Now the thing is, this is not a problem if the world is 6,000 years old. If the world and the universe are billions and billions and billions of years old, why do we still have a sun? A point that I forgot to mention earlier, as this thing is deteriorating, I feel this is also a good point to mention that the world works according to natural laws. The first law is the law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics states that we cannot create or destroy energy or matter, which means to get this wood, I cannot create wood. I need to plant a seed. The seed will take nutrients from the ground, it will take substance from the air and from the sun, and it will create a tree. Slowly but surely it will develop into a tree, because it will take resources and develop into something else. I can burn this piano, but it will turn into ash, it will turn into anything else. One of the fundamental laws of science, the first law of thermodynamics, states that nothing can be created or destroyed. Now, how does this fit in with Stephen Hawking's theory that nothing existed and then it exploded into everything? It contradicts the first substantial law of nature that we have, the first scientific law that we have. The second law is coming to play here. Everything tends towards disorder. Everything will break down. Your body, your house. Who here, when you bought your first house, you realized, listen, upkeep is a pain. Because everything for some reason just breaks, and it breaks down quickly, and you need to restore it, and you need to maintain it, and you need to cut your grass, and as you get older you need to maintain your body, and just everything tends towards disorder, because nothing improves by itself, which is the exact opposite of what evolution is teaching, that we're slowly but surely for no reason improving. The second observable, provable, testable scientific thing that I want to look at is the fact that the moon is moving away. We can see that the moon is drifting away slowly but surely. If the world is 6,000 years old, it's not a problem. It would have been closer. The tides would have been a little bit higher. Gravity, influence between the earth and the moon would have been bigger. If the world is billions of years old, with the expansion of the universe, why do we still have a moon? So NASA and the other scientists, which it sounds like I'm trying to be condescending, I'm not, but if you see the next theory, then you understand my tone of voice. NASA thinks that they have a solution why we still have a moon. According to NASA's website, Earth's moon probably formed when a large body about the size of Mars collided with Earth, ejecting a lot of material from our planet into orbit. Debris from the Earth and the impact from the body accumulated from the moon approximately 4.5 billion years ago. The age of the oldest collected lunar rocks, 12 American astronauts landed on the moon during NASA's Apollo landing. So they believe something the size of Mars hit the Earth without leaving this gap and forming that gap perfectly round. These people are much smarter than I am. But when I read stuff like this, I feel like I missed a day at school somewhere. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. It doesn't compute. Even if you look at the world population levels. This is, by the way, according to the United Nations Bureau of Population, and everything, the graph is just my own, but still it's true. So if you look at where we are now, we are currently at about 8 billion, roughly. It sort of varies and it grows a lot, and it's going to grow quicker as we head to 2050. Now, this graph is perfectly fine as we see the influx of people, and if we look about 4,000 years ago, there would have been roughly about 8 people. I heard a story like that somewhere. Fits perfectly with the Noah story. But now the next question that some of you are going to ask, but what about the dinosaurs? Very good question. The thing is, the word dinosaur was only invented the other day. Before that, we used another word, dragon. Because the word dinosaur means terrible lizard. But now the question is, where do the dinosaurs fit into this whole scheme of things? Well, did you know that the word dragon, which replaced the word dinosaur, or was replaced by the word dinosaur, is used 18 times in the King James Bible? It just means terrible lizard. Who knows the guy Marco Polo? Who's ever played the game in the pool? Marco Polo. But before that, Marco Polo was a very interesting individual. In the when he was exploring around, he was the first person who was legally allowed by the Chinese emperor of the time to go throughout the whole of China and do whatever he wanted. He received what they call the golden passport. Now with this golden passport, he was allowed to get lodging, food, horses, whatever he wanted for free, because he found favor in the emperor's view before he went back to Italy. So he went around and he wrote down everything that he saw, and then he went back to Italy. Now in his journals, number one, he said that a lot of what he saw, he didn't report back of fear of people not believing him, which I find is a very interesting thing. But in his journeys and in his journals, he writes about how the emperor raised dragons to pull his chariots. They had the official role of dragon feeder. Why would you need a dragon feeder in your emperor? Only if you have a dragon or a dinosaur. These are what we call the Ica stones. They're found in the Ica Valley in Peru. Now, they're a bunch of stones. They vary in size from about this to about this. But they depict dinosaurs. And there's thousands of them. You need to emphasize that there are thousands of them. So this person discovered them and he started selling them. And they depict dinosaurs with people, and they have, like if you can see there, they've got spots on them, circles, something that we don't see today. But yet when the authorities found out that this person was selling artifacts, they quickly got to him and they said, well, listen, you're selling artifacts, you're going to jail. And he immediately switched his story and he said, no, I made them myself. So the authorities sort of backed down. Now this is sort of the story around it, but it's true. You can just Google it, as you can find with anything else. But you can see that these things exist. Now, if you're going to sell artifacts to the world that you want to sell, you're going to make something that looks like something that you've seen on Jurassic Park, something that we can relate to. But yet when we see these things, we see humans and dinosaurs together. Another thing that we see is we see circles on them. But only recently did we find perfectly preserved dinosaur skin. How would you know that they have circles on them if you haven't seen a dinosaur? Now what I believe, before you continue thinking that I'm crazy, what I believe is if we look at the Bible, it says that God created the world, and outside of the world He created the firmament above the firmament. There was waters above the water. So what I believe, and this is just a theory, but what I believe, what the Bible teaches is that God created everything, and around the world He created this dome of either glass, vapor, or not, of water, whether it be cloud or ice or whatever that surrounded the earth. And you're saying, Johan, that's crazy. Are you telling me you're just expecting air or water to stay above the air? Well, it's clouds, very much. But I believe that there was a different type of cloud or something around the earth. But what this would entail is that the air pressure would double. If the air pressure is double, you should see what happens to lizards and plants. You should see, because they don't stop growing and they breathe through their skin. So there's something very interesting to see how all of this happens, how they just increase in size and grow in size, and how people who are sick heal, which is one of the things that they're doing now, especially for people who go hiking very high in the mountains. And when they go hiking in the mountains and they lose all circulation in the limbs, and they get gangrene and frostbite and all of this, they put them in a hyperbolic chamber of air where they double the air pressure. That's all they do. They don't treat them, they just give them more air, more pressurized air. And the people heal at ridiculous rates. Now what I believe is that the world was surrounded by this water level of sorts. And in the time of the flood, that came down. Because what you also see directly after the flood, people started living for 1,000 years before that, and suddenly a few hundred years or a short time after the flood, you suddenly see the age expectancy drop down from 1,000 to 600 to 400 to 300 to 200, and just you literally see the deflation of the age of people after the flood. Which is why I believe that everything is sort of just going, because we're just decaying in the way that we are, because all of this is going out. Which is why I believe that in the Bible time there were dinosaurs, especially in the time of Noah. And people saying, no, but are you telling me that they took dinosaurs on the ark? Yes, I believe that Noah was old enough and wise enough to realize that you take a baby because they're smaller, they sleep more, they eat less, and they live longer. Did you know that the biggest dinosaur egg is about this size? Which means that the biggest dinosaur as a baby is no bigger than this. That's amazing. There's more than enough space for all of them. And then the thing is, what about in the Bible? There's an interesting thing that happens in the book of Job. Now, the book of Job is a very interesting book, but it's also a very dangerous book to start teaching out of, because you need to pay attention to who's speaking and what are they saying in what context. But what happens is Job has everything, then he loses everything, and then there's this about 40 chapters of 38 chapters roughly of just him and his friends just debating who God is, and sort of doing what we're doing these days and debating, is there God and why is everything going wrong? And it just sort of spirals out of control from there, until this point where God sort of steps in and he does what any parent at some stage or another sort of does, and he says, who pays the rent? Who did this? Who's in control? So he starts asking him all these questions. Were you here when I created the earth? Can you hold the sun and moon and stars? Do you keep everything in orbit? Do you do this? And he gives all this explanations like we do, like who pays the rent? Who does this and who does this? And God asks him all these rhetorical questions to put Job and his friends in their place. But then he ends with two of God's greatest creatures. And it goes like this. Now look, the behemoth. Now, modern translations either translate this as an ox, or a hippopotamus, or a crocodile. We don't know what a behemoth is. I believe I do, and some people do. I believe it's a dinosaur, but let's pay attention. Which I made along with you, he eats grass like an ox. An ox does not eat like an ox. That's just a stupid expression. Why would you say that? So he eats grass. This is not a carnivore. See how his strength is in his hips, and the power of his muscles are in his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar tree. A hippopotamus does not have a tail like a cedar. Or is it just me? His sinews of his thighs are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass, and his bones are like the bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. He who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains can bring forth food for him. Where all the beasts of the fields play. He lies under the shady trees and the thicket of the reeds of the marsh. The shady trees cover him with their shadows, and the willows of the brook surround him. Look, the river rages, but he is not alarmed. Even a raging river doesn't even alarm him. He trusts that he can draw up the Jordan into his mouth. This is not a small animal. Can anyone catch it by his eyes, or pierce its nose with a snare? Saying, you're not going to tame this one. Then he moves on to the next one in chapter 41. Can you draw out Leviathan? So first he used the biggest land animal, which I think was one of those big dinosaurs, those big ones. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or a snare with his tongue, with a line which you let out? Can you put a cord in his nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? And then he carries on for a few verses, and then he carries on with this, just for the sake of time. Who can remove his outer garment, or who can approach him with a double bridle? Basically, who can tame him? Who can open the jaws of his face? His teeth are terrible all around. So this could still be a shark or anything else. His scales are his pride, shut up tightly with a seal. One is so near to the other, no air can come between them. They are joined to each other, they stick together, and they cannot be separated. Now, I don't know a very scaly type thing in the ocean, but let's see this. He sneezes, flashes forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goes smoke, out of the seething pot of a cauldron. His breath kindles coals, and flames go out of his mouth. 3 times now that this is mentioned. Saying, Johan, that doesn't make sense. You're telling me, number one, first you wanted me to believe in dinosaurs, and now you want to believe me in dragons, fire-breathing dragons. All I'm saying is this is what the Bible teaches. And I kept on thinking about this, and then I realized one day, there are certain chemicals that are perfectly fine until they get oxidated. I'm not saying this is what happens. I'm saying this makes sense to a certain degree. Chemical, the moment it gets oxidized, Why is this important? Because I believe in life we have 4 fundamental questions. How do we get here? Why are we here? How do we know right from wrong? And where do I go when I die? If evolution is true, in its most purest form, I know every evolutionist and every Christian, we all have our differences. I'm generalizing a lot. But if evolution is true, where do we come from? We're an accidental mistake that doesn't make sense because nothing cannot create something. So there must be a first cause that is outside of nature, which is what I believe Christianity sort of fulfills, because God is outside of time, space and matter, which means He's not limited by it, which means He's not limited by our first law of thermodynamics, that nothing can be created or destroyed. So God is the original cause. So if evolution is true, you're here by accident, you have no real purpose. Why are you here? You have absolutely no real purpose if evolution is true. The quicker you die, the quicker you become compost, and the quicker you start contributing and stop polluting. If Christianity is true, you were created with love, in love, by love, for a purpose, with a greater purpose. Where God created you and He went down, God Almighty went down to His creation that is currently rebelling. He took their form, He served the people that were hating Him and were rebelling against Him, and He took the punishment that they deserved upon Himself so that they might get the salvation that they don't deserve. That doesn't make sense. But it's so beautiful. And yet that's what He did. And then this is the question that no one's been able to answer, and I've spoken to doctors of philosophy in Germany regarding this question. And without God, you can't answer this question, because if evolution is true, and this is a very important point, if you have no God, there is no right or wrong, it's just a matter of opinion. Technically, no evolutionist can say that murder is wrong, or rape is wrong, or pedophilia is wrong, or stealing is wrong. If there is a God, there's morality. But what's happening these days is people are trying to say, don't force your morality on me, but yet they're doing the same with us. But we're not trying to force our morality on them. We're trying to show them that there is a morality. We're trying to show that because God exists, there is a right or a wrong. Without God, there is no right or wrong. There's no 2 ways about it, because then it's always a matter of opinion. Then there's no difference between Hitler or Gabby. Where do I go when I die? If evolution is true, you become compost. You start contributing in a different way. You just become, and you just get renewed. And then one way or another, something just goes. Apparently we get better, but the laws of science sort of disagree with that. But depending on which side of the argument you're on, you're either getting better or you're becoming compost. If Christianity is true, then these things are important. If Christianity is true, when someone asks you, why do you think Christianity is true? Hopefully, you'll be able to say, because I believe the science backs it. Because I believe that the evidence points towards it, and the evidence that supposedly contradicts it, contradicts itself. Everything that we discuss today is not a way to win an argument. Because as we see with Paul in the book of Acts, he went from synagogue to synagogue and he shared truth. It shows how he went to synagogue and he reasoned with them, he debated with them, and he reasoned with them the scriptures and everything around them. We even see him in Acts 17, how he reasoned from their understanding of God, from there to try and reach them for the gospel. And when he reasoned and when he debated with their logic and what they had to understand, it explicitly says that some believed and some don't. My objective above all else is let us find truth. I don't care whose truth it is. I don't want to be right. I don't care about being right. I care about finding out what is right. Because I don't want to get to the end of the road and be on my deathbed and start wondering, but flip, what now? I believe that we have a responsibility not to remember this whole presentation, but we have the responsibility to have a strong faith so that we can share what we believe. And if someone has a question, we shouldn't be scared to say, listen, I'll get back to you and let's get together again. But I believe that everything that we've discussed here, my main objective, like I said, was to Deepen our roots in the faith so that we can encourage and not feel like we're constantly on the back foot. Secondly, so that we can also maybe have more answers for an asking world, and maybe we answered some of our own questions. But for me, the thing is, may we start being more equipped. May we start taking this seriously, because it does have an eternal consequence. Because I believe that as much as this is encouraging, may we not constantly feel like we're on the back foot. As I close, that's my message. When we speak to people, when people bring up objections, let's not be scared that they might be right. Let's be happy, because maybe we'll find the truth. If someone brings up something that you don't agree with, and you have evidence for it, or you have sound reasoning for it, then stick with what you stand for. It doesn't help anyone if we're both wrong. Let's seek truth. That's my objective. And I pray that for all of us, and may we share this message in the applicable time. Let's close our eyes and pray. Dear Lord, I want to say thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for sharing your hope and your love and your peace with us today. Lord, I pray today for clear minds. I pray that we can have this message in our hearts with passion, Lord. Help us to remember what we need to remember. Help us to know whatever I forgot to share, and help us just to realize the truth, to see lies and false interpretations when they appear, Lord. Help us seek truth. Give us guidance. Allow us to be humble and clear when we speak to your people who are still to know you, Lord. Help us grow in our faith. Help us grow in our reasoning, Lord. I thank you for your love. Amen.